All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. It is 2 o'clock Eastern Time. I really appreciate everyone being here for this webinar. We're going to have a lot of fun. My commitment to everyone here is I want you to walk out of this webinar with 3 to 4 good knowledge nuggets that you can go back and apply in your companies. And the topic for today is choosing the right architecture to scale with NetSuite. So very excited about this today. I want to walk through what the agenda is. So I'm going to show that in just a second. Here are the topics we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start with what is the impact of having a cluttered architecture in NetSuite? What are the two paths for AP automation? This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. You're going to get to hear sort of how we at Charted think of the world when it comes to technology, tech stack, and how to think about the future. We're going to talk about the real cost of app switching and connectors, which is something that comes up all the time in our conversations with folks that are interested in this. Key features to expect in a modern AP automation platform. That's a huge thing that we want to make sure that we continue to push this message out to the world. And then, of course, like what are the business outcomes that you should expect to see when you're following, this path of picking your architecture and focusing on AP automation as a lever to maximize efficiency and get to a better, just a better place as a business. So very excited about today. I do want to start with a quick introduction. My name is Bernardo Enciso. I am the founder and CEO of Charted. Again, very excited to be here. A little bit about my background. So I've spent the last 20 or so years in business applications, ERP, consulting, software. So I'm very passionate about this topic. I love to talk about architecture. I love to talk about NetSuite. Um, so I'll try to, make sure that I share as much as I can, and I'm hoping that this is going to be a helpful webinar for everyone. Just a little bit about Charted. So we are about 75 people in the company, global organization, offices in the US, Mexico, the UK, and yeah, just very excited to be here and get this started. All right, so I want to start this webinar with an idea, which is business outcomes start with the right architecture. And I want to just show, one of my favorite Dilbert comic strips. So I'm going to try to make this a little lighter to begin with. And the idea here, and this is something that we see all the time, which is there's a lot of information out there about architecture, scalability, ERP, different options of systems. You probably get bombarded with marketing emails every single day. Everyone claims that they're going to allow you to scale your business. And the question is, who do we listen to, right? And how do we make sure that we're digesting the right information in order to make the best possible decisions? So obviously this is really funny, and it's kind of mocking that entire process. But what I would say is two things. Make sure that as you're obviously going to hear from me and you're going to hear my opinion and some of the things that I have to say. Again, it's only 30 minutes, so I'll try to make it as fun and interactive as possible. But I would argue, speak with your peers, right? Find a fellow CFO, find a fellow business applications person, find a fellow controller, and see what their experience has been, because that's actually pretty powerful. Obviously, there's also the option to go to your NetSuite consultant and go to your partners. That's also very, very helpful. So I would say those two things are really, really important just to wrap your head around architecture, business process, and which path to take as you're looking to enhance, just your business application stack and AP automation in general. All right, so let's also level set. What do we mean with the right architecture? So I want to make sure that we kind of set the context for the conversation today. And what I'm going to say here is System architecture for today, in this context, let's define it as the intentional design of where work happens, where data lives, and how the information flows between systems in order to support a business process. That's really important because we're going to talk a lot about AP, a lot about AP automation, and all the different sort of systems switching back and forth and things like that. So, where the work happens, where the data lives, and how the information flows. That's really, really important for today. Now, in the context of AP, it is how you and in what system onboard and manage vendors. So that's really important. Capture, manage, and process your vendor bills, match and approve your vendor bills, and of course, last but not least, how you pay your bills, right? So this entire process, where do I go to do all these activities and where does that data live? So that is, again, kind of level setting the context for the conversation today. I do want to start with a quick poll, and we're going to try to make this fun and interactive. But I do want to ask the audience, where does the majority of your AP workflow reside? So we're going to put this out there for a few seconds. I expect this may be a mix. And I think there's probably going to be a lot of flavors out there. Maybe some folks are 100% in NetSuite. I'm assuming we may have a few customers of Charted, so thank you for being here. And then, of course, there's going to be folks that do some of this outside of NetSuite, and maybe some folks just like everything's entirely manual. So we're gonna, maybe give it another 5 or 7 seconds, and then we'll see what the audience says about where they go. And oh, look at that. It looks like, yep, it is a mix. Looks like 59% entirely inside of NetSuite. Now there's flavors of that. Some folks may have more automation than others in NetSuite. Some folks may have, you know, full automation and they're just looking to like, what else is out there? How can I think about this to improve? And then of course, kind of some are split between NetSuite and some other systems. So thank you for that. For those folks who have this business process split, and I actually think this is pretty applicable to everyone. I want to show something that I believe most of the audience is going to be familiar with. And sometimes we refer to this as the tech stack spaghetti. Um, in all seriousness, this is actually pretty common. And this is not, I'm not picking on any of these companies. These are all great companies and great solutions. The point that I'm trying to make with this slide is that business applications architecture can be, and most of the times people just have this type of spaghetti and it's complicated. And this just adds a lot of clutter and it adds a lot of complexity to how we operate our businesses. Um, Philosophically speaking, and we're going to talk about this later in the presentation, one of the things that we try to do at Charted is how do we fix this and how do we simplify this going forward? But the point here is this is a massive problem for the organizations. There's no question that many of these integrations are totally needed. But the question is there opportunity to simplify this cluttered architecture? The answer is yes, and we're going to talk about that. So that leads into kind of the main, topic of the conversation, which is how do I think about the paths of system architecture and AP automation in the context of what's out there, the options available, and how should we think about which architecture leads to better quality, more efficiency, better and stronger controls, and also which path is going to give you the best shot at scaling your company. So I'm going to start with the external platform, right? So those of you, I think it was about 18%, are using an external platform. Later in the presentation, we're going to go through a real life example that may resonate with you. But you can think of these folks as more general purpose AP automation, right? So the reality is all of these companies that are external, they are trying to integrate and they're trying to work with as many ERP providers as they can. And most of them do. Most of them have 8, 10, 12 integrations, sometimes more. they need to keep their system's general purpose in order for them to be able to integrate with all these ERPs that are out there. And just by the nature of that is really difficult for them to match how their system works with how a specific ERP works, like NetSuite. And then that leads into some issues like reconciliation. You have two different reports that are telling you different things based on where you go. There's obviously the connector maintenance, which we'll also talk about in a few minutes. As you add more systems into your tech stack, there's also the increase in data breach and security, just for the factor of you're adding another system, another layer to maintain and support and make sure that it's safe. And then one thing that comes up all the time is a little bit of that finger pointing, right? So if you run into an issue with the connector, a lot of times they'll point to the ERP, and then the ERP will point to the third-party vendor, and then that kind of creates a little bit of inefficiency in terms of getting your problem solved, which at the end of the day, you want to fix it, you want to move on, and that can be challenging. And then there's an integrationless path, right? And this is where I get to talk a little bit about how we see the future at Charted, which is we want to make sure that we're here to reduce, to simplify, and to unify. And this is where you start to see things like AP automation that is purposely built for NetSuite. This is not catered to any other ERPs. We're not thinking about SAP. We're not thinking about anything else outside of NetSuite. We're thinking about how does this get optimized for NetSuite, and how do we make sure that people get the most efficiency possible because we're purpose built for that ERP. And that creates a massive advantage, right? So, of course, workflows are going to be faster, but also you're going to get a unified source of truth because we live where your NetSuite data is. And that is a very, very different way to operate. And it's a very, very different way to do business transactions in your ERP and on top of NetSuite through some of the apps. And again, I'll talk about this in a few minutes in terms of how this all works. And then, of course, from a support perspective, we know NetSuite. We live in NetSuite all day long, so we definitely support, any type of questions related to, how does our solution relate to the rest of NetSuite, which is also really important. Now, diving into what integrationless means a little bit more from a finance and operations perspective, I love to show this slide. And again, bear with me. I'm trying to make this not super technical. But if you think of NetSuite, there's multiple layers of data and functionality and how NetSuite works. But if you think about it at a pretty high level, think of NetSuite as a box and think of three layers that are in NetSuite. So if you go to the bottom of the box, you're going to see it says your NetSuite data. And this is the underlying data. This is all the transactions that go through NetSuite. This is all the financial details and all the information that is needed for you to be able to pick up that information, run your reports, add transactions, anything that you need. Then you have the next layer, which is the NetSuite out-of-the-box features. And this is, again, we all love NetSuite. It's a very powerful ERP. It does a lot of things. And this is the layer where NetSuite kind of builds all the functionality that they offer out of the box. And that includes obviously your GL, your core AP, which they do have AP functionality, which is basic. And then accounts receivable, billing, and there's a bunch of other modules that NetSuite has built over time. Again, very powerful layer, it's huge, very broad, and very effective. Now, here's where the third layer comes in, and this is where Charted comes in. And we're not the only company doing this. There's other companies doing this, across different areas of NetSuite. It could be human resources, it could be, customer billing and things of that nature. But this third layer is really where the more advanced capabilities come into play. And this is just given the NetSuite power of allowing companies like Charted to come in and build on top of the NetSuite platform additional features and functionality that can augment the capabilities of what they do. And this is where you start to get more vendor automation, invoice automation, payment automation, and all the different building blocks of what we do within our AP automation stack and suite. And it is very, very powerful because, as I said in my previous slide, you end up with this unified tech stack, this unified source of truth, and your data stays in NetSuite, which is very helpful. And then you're going to see at the bottom of the box, a handful of integrations. As I said at the beginning, integrations are never going to go away. But this type of architecture, it really allows you to be more focused and more intentional on those integrations that really matter to you. And a great example of this is we work with customers all the time that have some type of proprietary application that feeds into NetSuite to do some maybe billing calculations or different things. And that is something that is so business critical for them. So having a tech stack for AP automation that's fully contained is a big advantage. Now, what are key things? And we've talked about some of these. Obviously, the unified NetSuite reporting, focusing on the integrations that matter, as I just said. And then let's talk about user adoption, right? So when it comes to NetSuite, people that are already in NetSuite, adding more power to NetSuite, it helps with that tremendously. Not to mention the last point in here, which is app switching. And I want to talk about that for a second, but I do want to do our second poll of the day. And I want to hear from the audience again. And the question is, on average, how many different times do you think an employee switches between apps every single day? And this is really interesting. And we started to do quite a bit of research at Charted, and I'm going to share that in just a second. But it's pretty interesting because there's no question that people live in browsers, they live in a bunch of different systems. So we get really curious because we said, yeah, we know that we have the unified reporting, we're eliminating the problem of connectors. That's all great. But what about the app switching? So let's take another 5 seconds or so to, answer this, and then we'll close out the poll, see what this looks like. All right, so we got 56% they think between 0 and 1,000, and then 44% between 1,000 and 2,000. All right, so let's see what the data says. Let's see, there you go. So too many systems, not enough focus. So the answer is 3,600 times a day. There's actually two very reliable studies that we found that talk about this. And one is from Pegasystems, conducted back in 2018. The second one is from Harvard Business Review, conducted in 2022. And what's fascinating about this is not only massive, but it's growing. So from 2018, which was about 1,100 times a day, to 2022, it went up to 3,600 times a day. So that's about 2.3x. And again, that was 3 years ago, 2 years ago. So we expect that that's actually continued to climb. And the reason why we bring this up is, again, going back to this philosophical approach and what we think about when we think of the future of AP automation, which is how do we simplify? How do we reduce? How do we make things easier? That's really our motto at Charted, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, there's obviously the external systems, and one thing that I promised at the beginning of the conversation is we'll go through examples of app switching and where this is disruptive and what does this look like in terms of the architecture. So one thing that happens pretty frequently, and this is we see this all the time, this is the feedback that we get from our customers or people that we talk to that are not very happy with how things are going with external systems, is this is what people are promised, right? So when you talk to someone, they say, yep, your business process may live in a couple different places. You may still need to do some reporting related to expenses out of NetSuite. You may still need to do some of the vendor onboarding in our system. You're going to do the scanning in our system. And then don't worry, our connector will sync all the data. It just works. So that is a quote that we hear all the time. And I appreciate the quote, and I know the connectors are out there and they try to do their job the best we can or the best they can. But again, this is sort of like what we're promised when we go down that path from an architecture perspective. Here's the feedback that we get from folks, and this is what it really looks like. So, of course, this is a little bit exaggerated in terms of like all the possible things that could go wrong. But these things actually do go wrong. And this is something that is really important. And again, going back to the philosophical stance of why we do what we do is we're trying to address all these things. And I'm just going to walk through one example. And that example is the three-way match inaccuracies. When you have purchase orders going into NetSuite, because that's where they generate, that's what you want to make sure is your system of record for that. And then your invoice is going to a different system. By definition, there is no way you can do a proper three-way match between the two. Now, if it's a one-to-one match and it's a happy path, of course you can. Like that's going to work well. That's what most connectors do, and that's all great. The problem is the happy path can be maybe 50% of the volume of transactions, maybe 60, 65%, but there's a solid 20, 25, sometimes 30% of transactions that are not happy path, right? So, and that can be we have multiple POs for one invoice. We have multiple invoices for one PO. We have credits that were issued. We have change orders that were applied to the purchase order. And all of those edge cases start to add up. It can be one of those. It can be a combination of all of those. And that's when some of these data sinks and some of these issues start to pop, right? Because you start to see all these different things that the sync doesn't really handle that well. You start to see things that are different in one report versus the other, and then you start to waste a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on. You talk to support, and then that leads into some of these, some of that finger pointing that we talked about at the beginning. Again, the point of this slide is a little bit of a reality check and some of the feedback that we get from folks in terms of like what actually happens when you split that business process into multiple places. And again, best way to validate some of these things is speaking with a peer, speaking with a consultant, or your NetSuite consultant. That can be incredibly helpful. So how do we see the world at Charted, right? So I'm going to start by saying we think of it as we want to keep things in a box, and that box is called NetSuite. So we want to make sure that the process is very straightforward, all the way from vendors to invoices to payments, and then to accruals and reporting. And these are the things that we do, right? So all the way from vendor onboarding, collecting documents, making sure that we get the invoices in place, because we have all the full data set of NetSuite, and we have AI embedded into our process to capture invoices. We have probably one of the highest degrees of accuracy when it comes to populating all the details from those vendor bills into the system. And then we can actually learn from the patterns, not just of the AP transactions, but any type of coding or things that are related to that vendor that can help us get more accurate over time. Payments, right? If you need to pay via checks or ACH or global payments, like all of that is supported. And then, of course, we have the reporting. All of this supported by AI. We're the AI first company, and we try to kind of sprinkle that across our product. So you see that in most notably Invoice AI, where you can add some directions to capture some of the more complex type of invoices. Our approval automation engine, that's what we do across all the different elements of the process. And then, of course, the real-time NetSuite reporting. All right, so what are the features that you should expect in a modern AP automation platform, right? So we talked about invoice capture, right? So the fact that we combine AI with some of that machine learning to try to predict as best as we can how to not just capture what's in the invoice, but match against some of the GL coding that we need to have in the bill and do that at a line level. That is one of the biggest strengths that we have, right? Because again, going back to that full NetSuite data set. Approval workflows, right? This is when it's really important, because one of the things that we hear all the time from folks is, they try different avenues, either creating a workflow using NetSuite or different paths just to try to support some of their most complex approvals. And they really wrestle with that. So if you have run into some of that in the past, we should talk, because this is one of our biggest features and capabilities. We support everything from, of course, level approvals, but also things like matrices, right? Like combinations of things that then route to a certain individual or group of individuals. Three-way match we talked about. That's a huge thing that we do because again we're in NetSuite and we have that full data set. The level of sophistication is unmatched. Of course, we'd be happy to demo that product at any point in time. Vendor payment, onboarding, and management, right? So this is really important. We have a very sophisticated way of sending forms out to vendors, capture information, capture attachments, anything that you need in order to kind of get that into NetSuite. We can trigger an approval process so that you can review the changes, approve the changes, and have all the necessary controls for that. That's huge. From a payment execution perspective, I talked about all the different rails that we offer. So it's ACH, checks, global payments, international, and then of course the reporting layer that comes on top of all these amazing features. So I'm getting close to the end here. I do have one more thing that I want to talk about, which is business outcomes. We started the webinar talking about how choosing the right architecture is really what can drive the business outcomes that you're looking for. And if there's one thing that I would like the audience here to walk away from this webinar with is this slide, which is what are we at Charted doing to really deliver these business outcomes for our customers? And I would say these are the four biggest things that we do. So first and foremost, we give you that end-to-end NetSuite visibility, right? So from invoice to payment, everything that happens in between, real time, at the right time with the right set of reports without second guessing if you're looking at the latest and greatest, if this is right, if this is not right. We give you that visibility. We keep you in NetSuite, which is huge. Second one, scalability when it comes to approvals, controls, and compliance, right? So we want to make sure that we give our customers the confidence that we have a tight process, that things are going to be controlled, so that when you're working with auditors, you have the confidence that everything's in place. And that applies to global organizations, right? So you're going to find as you sort of look at options, some folks are very US centric. We are very global and very much work with organizations that are looking for this level of control across the globe. The third one is the close, right? We want to make sure that we make the close as fast as possible. This is all about efficiency. So yes, how do we make sure that our invoice AI product and engine is incredibly helpful and accurate so that we can save you as much time as possible? Three-way match as well, and then accelerate the payments process, right? So we want to make sure that we spend less time doing data entry and doing manual work, and then more time on what really moves the needle with the business. And then last but not least, I talked about the global capabilities, but the fact that we actually started this company as NetSuite consultants, we know NetSuite. We're purpose built for NetSuite, and that is huge, right? Because it is fully optimized for your NetSuite experience, and that can make a big difference. So we have a couple minutes left. I do want to, number one, share with you that we have an ebook, a guide that you can download. So I'm going to pause here for a few seconds. If you want to scan the code, we're going to follow up anyways with an email, so we can do that. But if you scan this code, you're going to be able to download this ebook as for everyone to kind of look at. It definitely touches on a lot of the things that we talked about today. And with 1 minute left, I do want to see if anyone has any questions. So we'll probably do one or two quick ones and see if folks have any questions.
Hey, Bernardo, we have one question here. So you touched on, the features to look out for in a modern AP platform. But this person asked, if you had to pick one area of AP to automate first, where would you start?
Where would you start if you had to pick one area? That's a really, really good question. I would argue that depending on where you are in that journey, typically where people see the most immediate value is invoice scanning, right? So if you're doing that manually and you're keying in all these things by hand, like by typing them, um, people see a high return of investment in deploying, Invoice AI or some type of capability to do that automatically. If you're already in NetSuite, that's a nice thing about doing an integrationless AP automation process, which is, we really do plug and play into sort of your existing NetSuite instance and how you're using NetSuite. So that can be incredibly beneficial, and it can be a fast process. Any other questions, Anna, that we have?
Nope, I think that was it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you everyone for being here. Hopefully this was useful. Thank you for the time. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me directly, reach out to the company. I'm always around to help. And if you want to bounce ideas off of me, I'm happy to do that as well. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day.